And if you followed your local papers, you know that two grand juries were looking into the Oakland County Child Killer case. The first reference to that in the Michigan State Police reports was an entry in October of 2008, which you'll recall is before Prosecutor Cooper took office, in which Prosecutor Worthy told the investigators that she was considering a grand jury to look into the following people: redacted, 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 and Cabot. And you'll recall Cabot was the polygrapher up in Flint, and left no doubt in my mind that the grand jury was going to look into the Bush problem. And I do know that in October of 2010, Wayne County did start a grand jury. And I had personal knowledge of that at that time, although I never talked to anybody about it. That caused me some concerns, because the children would call me up and say that Williams was not talking to them anymore. And I knew that once the grand jury was formed, there were limitations, severe limitations, on the ability of law enforcement to talk to anybody. And yet I can't tell my kids that's the reason Williams is not talking to them. And I called Moran up a couple of times and I said, "Rob, can I tell my kids about the grand jury?" And he said no. So my kids did not know anything about the Wayne County grand jury until it was in the paper. Then we knew that Oakland County had convened grand juries to look into several cold cases, and I heard that the Oakland County Child Killer case wasn't part of it. I don't know whether it was an original entry or whether it was put in later, but we now have two grand juries in existence. And the Oakland County grand jury was a citizens grand jury, which consisted of 15 to 20 people or thereabouts, has a lifetime of a year, and is then automatically disbanded. The Wayne County grand jury, I was told, was a one-man grand jury, which means the judge is the sole person to take the testimony and make the decisions. And that has a 6-month period, and it can be extended for 6 more months. And then I've been told that you can extend that further, but you got to get a new judge, and that doesn't make any sense to me, because if the original judge hears testimony from a dozen people and the second judge hears testimony from another dozen, how do you make the decisions? And I don't know anything about that. And the Oakland County grand jury was a partial success. Prosecutor Cooper charged, as I recall from the newspaper reports, 2 cold cases in which she received convictions. And I remember reading in the paper where she told the public that, yes, you can solve these cold cases by circumstantial evidence. You don't need hard evidence. And so the purpose of convening a grand jury to check into those 2 cases was certainly appropriate and was a very good result. In the Oakland County Child Killer case, Prosecutor Cooper went public and said it would be solved only by scientific evidence. And it's, again, the ability of the prosecutor's office to talk through both sides of her mouth. I can use circumstantial evidence. I need scientific evidence. And we're going to get into the scientific evidence part a little bit later, and I hope to remember to come back to this comment. I have serious doubts as to whether any problems involved in Oakland County involved the Christopher Bush part. Pat Coffey said he's never talked to anybody in the prosecutor's office in Oakland County about this case. And the Bush involvement comes about only because Wasser and Coffey talked in 2006. And I think that's necessary for the Bush involvement. A most disturbing part of the Oakland County Child Killer case came to my attention in July of 2011. On the 19th of July, Dave Binkley from my office got an email from Mr. Walton from the prosecutor's office asking if we could appear in the courtroom of Judge Martha Anderson the next morning. I was a little surprised because Dave was not representing me in the Oakland County prosecutor case, but we showed up the next morning. We were shown into Judge Anderson's jury room, and that's a vacant room next to the courtroom, and told to wait. When the prosecutor showed up, Dave went out and talked to Paul Walton, and Walton told him that I was being charged with telling Kevin Dietz that of the formation of the Oakland County grand jury. Now, a few days before that, Channel 4 went public and told the world about the existence of the Oakland County grand jury. And Kevin came to our house the evening that broadcast was made. And I said, Kevin, whoever told you that committed a felony. And he said, Barry, I have 3 sources. And we all know from following police procedural novels and books that the media needs generally at least 2 sources to verify any evidence or statement of that nature. Well, that was an absolutely false charge. When we went into Judge Anderson's chambers, that's the legal term for office, and both Ms. Cooper and Mr. Walton were there and accused me of telling Mr. Dietz about it. I absolutely said it was false, that there was nothing that I talked to Mr. Dietz about in that regard. And afterwards, Dave went out and talked with Walton, and I said, what evidence do you have that Barry did that? And he was told it was just conjecture and innuendo and suspicion, and there were no hard facts, which I believe was true until somebody tells me to the contrary. And while you can't use circumstantial evidence in the Bush case, you can use those 3 elements to accuse me of a felony. I think it was a deliberate attempt by Miss Cooper to shut me up, and I'm pleased to report it hasn't worked. And we're going to discuss that further on in this case about what she relied on. Now, there is a grand jury statute in Michigan, and again with criminal law, I didn't know anything about it until this case got started. It has a provision in it for multi-county jurisdiction. And as an example, somebody sells stock in all 83 counties in Michigan under false pretenses. And rather than bring a criminal action in all 83 counties, they should go to one county and have one judge and one jury make the determination. And when I had asked some questions about that. When I got back to my office on July the 20th, I contacted Kevin Dietz and said, let me know, would you sign something saying that I was not responsible? He sent me an email saying that Barry King was not the source of my information on disclosing the Oakland County grand jury, and that I will testify under oath if requested. I made arrangements to go down to his office the next morning and pick up signed copies of that letter. I went out to appear before the Oakland County grand jury pursuant to a subpoena on July the 21st and gave a copy of that letter to Prosecutor Cooper, Prosecutor Walton, and Judge Anderson. We'll get into this a little later. I asked for their files on that, and they don't have any. Apparently didn't even keep a copy of my letter. But when I was out there that day, I had a few minutes, no planned meeting or anything else, to talk to Mr. Walton and Miss Cooper outside of the grand jury room. And one of the questions I asked her was, why were there two grand juries? And the answer was, because Kim Worthy wants to be governor. That emphasized my concerns about whether I have a political problem, a power and control problem, or the solving of a crime problem. The first two should not enter into solving this case. I do not know the present status of these grand juries. I don't know if any reports were filed by them. I don't know if the grand jurors even have a responsibility to do that. But nobody's been charged as a result of either grand jury to the best of my knowledge. And I believe, until somebody tells me to the contrary, that the grand juries were adjourned without any action on the Oakland County Child Killer case.